brings you out here today?
People. I think it starts with each individual person, though. I mean, you take a look out here, the cars passing by, some smiles, some frowns. That's life, but people have to start with themselves and find their center. Otherwise, the rest falls out.
I'm a professor of political science. I actually have an adjunct position teaching online courses with history. I have a real bad tendency to break boundary rules, and political science today has been sort of reduced to quantitative studies where you just sit there and look at polls and try and figure out what the polls are telling you. And my tendency is to bring in lots of history and philosophy, and as a result I tend to be a little bit of a pariah in political science, which is cool because I think I'm a little bit of a pariah in society in general. The title of today's talk, Why Major Changes Are Necessary, just in part because I wanted to kind of have a sweeping general topic to work with. But in a way I could have also entitled this, Why Late Modernity or Late Capitalism is a very serious mistake, and why we probably ought to think about doing something a little bit different, which you probably already have ideas and you're probably already there a little bit. So I'm just going to maybe add to that, and then hopefully we'll have a good discussion afterwards. The basic part is the dollar. I think we have this visceral reaction when people say the dollar. And usually people are, they start salivating and they're really hungry and they want some more. Or there's this sense that the dollar is the source of all evil and that we need to reject it and move on. What the dollar is a reified thing. And what I mean by reified is that it's so abstractly thought about over and over and over again, it's actually become a real thing. Over time, we have come to believe that the dollar is so real, in fact, that we're willing to butcher each other, even though it's an abstraction over something. The reason we're willing to butcher each other, though, is because the thing that it abstracts is actually an incredibly powerful thing. The dollar isn't the root of all evil. It's what we do with it. And here's why it's a problem. The dollar is energy times time. So, for example, if you're driving down the road, and let's say you make a whopping $10 an hour, and a cop hands you a $150 speeding ticket because you were speeding, that police officer is effectively taking away 15 hours of your life. 15 hours that you cannot retrieve. You can make another $150 down the road, but you can't get that $150 back that you made because you can never have that 15 hours back. When you go to Starbucks and you buy a coffee, you're actually literally expending a chunk of your life. The way our economic system is set up is we trade, swap our thoughts, our time, and our energy using the dollar as the abstract representation of that. It is, in fact, a real thing, in the truest sense that human beings can create real things. It's completely tangible because I know it exists, because I can, if I'm your employer, I can pay you for that time that you served me, which is really what the root of the problem is. Not so much that there's a unit of measurement for your time and your energy, but rather the relationship that we've set up between labor and owners. Owners get to have a share of the profit, not necessarily because they work hard, not necessarily because they did anything to establish that ownership, but 98, 97% of the time because arbitrarily they were born rich. And that being born rich, that hereditary license that they have, allows them to do things like purchase shares in companies or establish companies, right? Most of the entrepreneurs that you can think of, who you think of as these, Bill Gates, etc., who have made all this money, did it with very serious seed money to start their corporations, very serious money to start their companies. There are exceptions. They are so rare and few and far between that we've actually had to make up bizarre myths about them. Horatio Alger, for example, didn't make his money by doing lots of really amazing hard work. He happened to be walking by a river while the owner of the company he was working for, his daughter fell in the river and was drowning, and he saved her, and then he was given a bunch of money. And so the Horatio Alger myth, which somehow fueled Americans into thinking if you just work hard enough you'll be rich someday, was done by random circumstances. Carnegie made it from rags to riches, right? I mean, there are a handful of examples out there. The vast majority of the wealth at the top is at the wealth by virtue of birth. The way we got into this situation, if you take this back a little bit, is we originally had, under feudalism, which is the product of the Western Roman Empire's collapse and the Germanic tribes taking over the western part of the Roman Empire. Under feudalism, we created a system of nobility. The nobility was in fact, as much as we kind of despise them and hate them and think they were hereditary, etc., they were in fact excellent. Aristocracy, the word aristocracy means government by the excellent. And the reason they were excellent was they had to be. They lived in a system that was, you could have called feudalism bullocracy. The way I get things done is I'm going to go up and I'm going to fight you. Or maybe I'm just going to line my army up and I'm going to have my army all painted up. They're going to be wearing their armor. They're going to have their pots and pans with so that as they walk, they can intentionally bang it. There's going to be a guy drumming, another guy playing some kind of musical instrument. We're going to make as much noise as we can. And we're going to try and spook the other side out. Because I don't actually want to fight if I'm a feudal lord. What I want to do is I want you to chicken out. It's a game of chicken. And the reason I don't want to fight is because as a feudal lord, I have to be in the front. I have to be out there with my sword from my horse, hacking away at guys trying to kill me and take me off my horse. In other words, it's extremely high risk what I do. To be a good noble, to be a good lord, I have to have amazing physical prowess. I have to have amazing stamina, amazing hand-eye coordination. I have to be a bloodthirsty, cold, calculating killer who can go in there and just hack away at people without hesitation. Because I hesitate, I'm dead. On top of that, I'm the guy running the economy in my fiefdom. So if I'm a baron, I run the economy in my barony. I'm the guy who does the math. I'm the accountant. I'm in charge of collecting the taxes. Now, I don't technically own the land, but neither do my peasants. We have a really weird situation between us where there's no actual ownership. But I have the right to extract taxes because it's been given to me by a lord above me. So if I'm a baron, a count gave me that right. And I have mercenaries. The reason I have mercenaries is that if you're my peasants, I don't want you being able to learn how to fight, because at some point you'll turn that on me and you'll rebel against me. And it's the deal I've struck with you. I will take care of you. In return, I'm going to have these mercenaries, right? Because you're going to pay me money, or you're going to pay me food, and I'm going to turn it into money to pay the mercenaries. And in return, I'll protect you. Now, the number one person I'm protecting you from is me and my mercenaries, right? This is a really, really good arrangement here. But number two, I'm protecting you from raiders. I'm protecting you from foreigners. I'm protecting you from the other baron who might come and try to plunder you. In return, all you have to do is every spring plow your fields and plant them, and every fall harvest them, and then you give me my share. And I stay out of your life. The peasants get to make their own laws. They get to try their own courts. There's no prisons. This is a non-prison society. Well, there are prisons for guys like me. If I get captured in combat, I go to prison by the other lords who captured me. The prisons were just for the top ruling class, the top 1%, the top 2%. The average person just was charged a fine, and they were by their peers, by their fellow peasants. This system, though, is kind of dangerous, because if I'm born to my title, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm the best soldier. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm the best accountant. By the way, I also have to be really charismatic. This isn't going to work if I can't charm people. I need to be able to talk people into fighting for me. I need to be able to talk people into doing nasty deeds for me, or just paying their taxes. So I'm literally everything. I'm the closest thing in the time period to Superman. And it's kind of where we get this idea of the noble hero, the guy who goes out there, the champion who fights the dragon, because these guys kind of were that. They had to be, because if I'm a noble and I'm facing you in battle and you kill me, you get to plunder, or if you capture me, you get some sort of plunder, right? So I've got to be good. The problem with this system is it only works in a society that doesn't have much commerce. As soon as commerce starts to develop, you get a new class of people, the merchant class. And the merchant class don't like being left out of all the decisions. They really want to be part of the decision making. Because of my hereditary status, and because I'm a really nasty bully, I don't really want to pay attention to the stupid merchants. As far as I'm concerned, this is my show. The risk is really high, but so is the reward. I have amazing authority over people. And as long as my peasants basically toe the line, my mercenaries are free to do whatever I want to with them. But as time goes by, the merchant class becomes more and more powerful. As commerce develops, the merchant class becomes so powerful, in fact, they begin to influence the nobility by bribing them. And so a relationship is established. Eventually that relationship gets jarred. And the way it gets jarred is the merchant class realize that they have so much authority, that they have so much power because they have so much capital that they can engineer revolutions. And those revolutions are going to replace the old nobility system with a new electoral republic. From now on, what's going to happen is, and the nobility kind of goes along with it, they don't have much choice of the matter, or they're massacred like in France. From now on, what's going to happen is, we're going to have a contest. It's not going to be mercenaries against mercenaries anymore. We're going to have a contest of voters versus voters. And the way this is going to work is the new noble class, we call them politicians. The new noble class is going to have lots and lots of cash because they're going to have to manipulate the voters into voting for them. They're going to have to brainwash people, trick them, manipulate them, alter the direction they wanted to go in so that they can be voted for. Well, that cash has to come from somewhere, which is why electoral republics are so good to merchants. Because now the merchants with all their surplus cash can come in and they can basically pick who's going to be the next governor, who's going to be the next county judge, by simply adding cash to the campaign. In the United States we call it campaign financing. In much of the rest of the world it's called bribery or graft. Right? This is a transfer of funds from a wealthy elite to the politician class. The politician class, however, isn't completely powerless in this process. They know that they can't get elected without the merchant money, but they lean back. They put pressure back. Oh, you want us to vote for this bill? I need campaign financing for my next election. The tragedy of this relationship, there's multiple levels of tragedy, but one of the tragedies of this relationship is that in the United States, our election cycles are 2 years. So it means as a politician, and it takes about a year to campaign. So it means as a politician, I might work for a year if I'm in Congress, House of Representatives, and then for the second year, I'm going to spend my time campaigning, which means going and getting money from the merchant class so that I can win the next election. It also means that I never care about the consequences of the laws beyond the next election. So the furthest out I ever think is 2 years out. So I'm always thinking about short-term gains, and I never care about long-term consequences. Everything is short-sighted, and everything is oriented towards me getting reelected. On the other side, the merchant class has got themselves into a trap. They're not as in control, I think, as you think they are necessarily, because I think what's happened is they've gotten themselves so trapped into their own game. Never believe your own lies. They've gotten themselves so trapped into their own game that they probably don't even know how to get out of it. They don't know how to think their way out of it anyway. So what we have is we have a consumer-based society, which is an amazing creature, right? If you were to go back just 200 years, probably nobody would have thought that what we've created here today, this society that we live in, was even remotely possible. I create a product for you. My goal is to create a product that's good enough that you'll get use out of it, but bad enough that within 3 to 5 years it'll completely break, and it's way more expensive to repair it than to just go buy another one. Right? That's planned obsolescence. We learned that in the aftermath of World War II, and the reason we learned that was because of the Great Depression. There are essentially 4 types of products that exist in the universe. There are products that if I consume them, we call these private goods. You can't consume them, and if I have a legal right to own them, you don't have a legal right to take them away from me. So, food, right? If I go to the store and I buy the food and I start eating it, like I buy a steak and I'm eating my steak. While I'm eating that chunk of steak that I'm eating, you can't eat it. It's only one of us can have it. Now I can cut the steak in half, but that means half the steak I can't eat, right? Even if I give it to you. So in other words, you can't truly share it. You can share parts of it, but you can't truly share it. And the way we set this up, I have a legal right to own it once I make my purchase, right? There's free goods, which are a joke. They don't exist, and they're not supposed to be called free. Deer. If I'm out in the woods and I'm shooting a deer, first come, first serve. But I didn't actually own the deer before I shot the deer. It was my bullet penetrating the deer that gave me the ownership to it, right? I don't actually have to pay anything other than for the bullet, the rifle, and the deer hunting license. So I'm not actually paying for the deer, I'm paying for the right to go out and shoot the deer. There are toll goods. Toll goods are goods that if I consume, I'm not preventing you from consuming it, but I have to pay to consume it. So for example, a tollway. Me getting onto a tollway doesn't prevent you from getting onto a tollway, but I have to pay to get onto the tollway. And then there are free goods. Free goods are goods that exist in such a high quantity that my consuming that good has, public goods. We already talked about free goods. My consuming that good has no bearing on whether or not you can consume that good. So for example, me getting on that road is a public good. Me getting on it doesn't stop you from getting on it, and I don't have to pay to get on it. I know we pay through taxes, but that's up front. It doesn't, after I've paid the taxes, I don't have to pay to get on it anymore. And by the way taxes work is I pay for something through my taxes, and the cost for me as an individual is a tiny fraction of the benefit I get from it. And you can think of the difference between a toll good and a public good as I'm paying less than the value of the good on the toll good, on the public good, and I'm paying more than the value of the good on a toll good. In other words, somebody's making a profit off of me on a toll good. So nobody's making a profit off of me on a public good. During the build-up to the Great Depression, the 1920s, we had a society in the United States that was extremely productive. So in other words, we could produce a lot. We had a high volume of output. We were, in terms of quantity, very capable. And in terms of quality, we were also really amazing. I know it's hard for us to imagine in 2011 that US industry was ever any good, but the reality was the US industry of the 1920s was top of the line. You didn't get any better. We were a rockin' society. We were so rockin', we had songs that went, we're into money, we're into money. And the reason for that is this was the age of appliances. Right? There were appliances that existed before the 1920s, but now the 1920s, we've got refrigerators, we've got washing machines, we've got this whole new set of appliances that are completely transforming the way we do work and the way we're thinking about labor. What happened was, we were producing high quality goods in massive quantity. One of the reasons why we had the high quantity was during World War I, in the 1910s, Europe had to re-gear all its industry to war. And so the United States stepped in and began producing consumer goods and sort of heavy industry goods that were non-war oriented to compensate for the fact that France and Germany and Britain were in war mode. This was especially true for the textile industry. As time went by, World War I eventually ended, and those European states decided, we want back in. And they began producing those consumer goods again. But we didn't get out. And so now there's a glut of consumer goods on the market because the gap that we filled is now being re-entered by the French, the Germans, and the British. And we stopped. We refused to stop. We continued to produce. They refused to stop. They continued to produce. But not only is it a huge quantity, we're producing goods that last a really long time. So you come buy a fridge from me, you're not going to come back and buy a fridge from me for 20 plus years. This is a very serious problem, unless you create a giant Ponzi scheme. That Ponzi scheme already existed, we just took it to a new level. It's called the stock market. What you do is you go and you start recruiting the new affluent middle class people who are singing "We're into money," and you get them to start investing in the stock market. Up until that moment, the stock market was a way that the upper class got a share of a corporation and then could have a share of its profits at the end. There was some speculation. Will it go up? Will it go down? But your real goal was to get the dividends at the end of the year, not to buy the stock low and then sell it high. Your real goal was to get your share of the company's profits. The problem is the companies aren't making profits in the 1920s. They're not making profits because what's happened is the private goods have actually accidentally become public goods. You can go buy as many refrigerators as you want, and there are so many out there that the consumers literally don't have to compete with each other for fridges, which means the price of the products collapse. When the price of the products collapsed, it meant to get them out of your warehouse, you had to sell the fridge for less than it cost for you to make it. In other words, the goods in the United States, this started in agriculture first, but it moved right into industry. The goods in the United States became public goods. We effectively created, on accident, a sort of socialist utopia where you could actually buy things for less than they actually cost to make them. You can't make a profit that way. There are very small dividends, if any, at the end of the year. And so here's the trick. If if we can get the middle class to come in and start buying high and selling low, then the upper class can show profits on their corporate ledgers at the end of the year. And that's how they kept the system going. For about 10 years, they just kept suckering the middle class in, getting them to waste their hard-earned money to buy stocks when they shouldn't be buying them. And the middle class would go, oh my God, the price of this stock is going up, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. I need to buy it. The upper class clearly knows what they're doing. It was so bad that guys like Joseph Kennedy, as in Jack Kennedy's dad, that Joseph Kennedy was actually going and finding companies that were on the verge of collapse, making bogus stories that that company was doing really well. He'd go and he'd buy a bunch of stock in that company when it was really cheap, and then the middle class would come in seeing that, they'd buy a bunch of stock from Joseph Kennedy, who'd be selling it as fast as he could, and as soon as he was out, the company would of course collapse. And then the middle class would lose everything, and Joseph Kennedy would eventually become so rich he bought his son the presidency. Which is what the merchant class does, right? So, we have a problem. The problem eventually explodes like an overripe zit in 1929, because we have this fake economy that's basically a giant Ponzi scheme that only works as long as new middle class people are getting in. And once the upper class realizes that they're throwing all this good money into this bad system, they start pulling the money out. And when they panic, the system starts to collapse, it starts to unravel. It takes a good 3 years before we feel the full impact, but by the time we feel the full impact, we're running 30% unemployment, and the United States and the world, minus the Soviet Union, are in ruins economically. Of course, the Germans are going to get out of this by organizing a mercantilist-style state-run society, a state-run economy. The Soviets avoided it because they were already doing a state-run economy. And so basically this was a good time to have a state-run economy. It was a really bad time to have laissez-faire capitalism until FDR comes along and then starts trying to implement the New Deal. The New Deal doesn't get us out of the Great Depression. What the New Deal does, it's a acetaminophen. What the New Deal did, which turns out to be poison after all, what the New Deal did was it came in and it made it so that it was bearable. We could get through this thing. It was World War II in combination with the New Deal that got it. World War II is the only war ever to get a country out of an economic disaster. So that myth. Wars cause recessions, if not depressions. World War II is different, and the reason World War II is different was it was 8 years long. It actually started in China, between China and Japan in 1937, July 7, 1937. It killed 65 million people, so it averaged about 8 million deaths a year. And it was just a whole-scale mass destruction. You know, Japan was in ruins, Germany was destroyed, Russia was in ruins, and that's why it got us out of the Depression. We destroyed so much of that accumulated wealth. We wrecked so much of the goods that we produced. We intentionally allowed the United States Army to use the Sherman. The Sherman was a horrible tank. The Russians produced much better tanks. The Russian crews that got the Lend-Lease Shermans from us called the Sherman a coffin for 5 brothers. They prayed, even though they were an atheist society, they prayed that they got stuck in a T-34 or something else. They were horrified at the prospect because the Sherman was this high-profile, thin-armored, small-gun tank. It was like a giant billboard, blow me up. The official Department of War stat on how many Shermans it took to take out one German Panther was 5. That at the end of the battle, you would have 1 Sherman left, there'd be no Panther, and the other 4 Shermans would be blowing up like the 4th of July. They were loaded with ammunition. And we did this, even though we had the technology to upgrade our tanks. We did this because we were getting rid of surplus goods. We were wiping out all the excess industry that had accidentally made it so that we couldn't sell products for profit. We could have re-engineered our society, and we could have decided, you know what, that's cool, everybody can have some now. But instead we took milk and poured it into the streets to destroy the surplus during the Great Depression, right? People are literally starving to death and we're dumping the milk. The government began, was it AAA? I forget what the A stand for. The government began paying subsidies to farmers so that farmers won't produce during the Great Depression at a time when people are literally starving to death. We realized that the only way we could keep a capitalist society was to sustain the system of scarcity. we had to get rid of the surplus goods. And that's what World War II did, which it basically reset the world economies. We came out on the other side and we intentionally engineered a society that would do two things. Either we wouldn't produce enough, so we would continue to pay farmers subsidies to not produce, or we would intentionally waste the goods as fast as we could. So we would get people to have bad eating habits, because bad eating habits would mean we could help the agricultural system from going back into the depression. Agriculture went into depression before industry did. Agriculture went in the 20s, industry went in the early 30s. We realized we could do planned obsolescence. We could do an occasional war from time to time. We would get consumers to buy stuff they don't need. And so what we did was we created a society where we were going to have massive advertisement campaigns on an epic scale never seen before to get people to consume, with the ultimate goal that you will throw it away, that you won't keep it. You didn't need it to begin with. We'll plant the desire in your head with 250 advertisements a day, which is what the average American is exposed to daily now. 250 advertisements a day. We will brainwash you, we will scrub your brain down in the system so that we can get you to buy stuff you don't need, working at a factory where you're getting underpaid to produce it. And then that way, what we can do is we can continually destroy surplus goods. At the same time, because we're making profit, the upper class is making profit on every sale, the wealth is actually working its way to the top. There's a really interesting schism in the way we created that in our society. Labor is what you do to survive. Work is what you do after that. So when you go to work, you're actually going to labor, and after you've been laboring for a while, then you begin working. And the way to think of it is, the buildings are works. They're tangible. When you put stuff down, you can touch it, right? That's the product of work. Labor is what you do to survive. So it's eating, sleeping, drinking, right? It's those sorts of things, and they're not very tangible. In our society, if you think back 150 years ago to the coal-powered Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Revolution has been around with us way longer than 200 years ago. The Arabs actually started the Industrial Revolution about 1,200 years ago. But the coal-powered Industrial Revolution took place about 200 years ago. And during that time period, that's when the nightmare of industrial work, 14-hour days, 6.5 days a week, stuck on an assembly line, that person is spending 99% of that person's day labor, because they're just making enough to survive from day to day. They are making nothing left. There's nothing left over. In the society we live in today, we actually have a very significant portion of the work day that is actual work. And the reason I know that's true is because we live in a consumer society. So at the end of the day, you've got your extra 20 bucks or whatever you have, you go squander it buying something with your life, right? Because remember, this is your time times your energy, buying something you don't need that you're then going to throw away. In effect, what we've done in our society is converted your time and your energy and your thoughts and your short moments, you've got 70, 80 years, into a disposable, throwaway thing. Because that's literally what you're doing when you throw away your excess goods. When you buy that bottle of bottled water for more than the price of gasoline, and you're done drinking it, and then you throw that bottle away because you also paid for the bottle, which, by the way, has bad chemicals in it. Don't drink bottled water if you can avoid it. By the time you're throwing it away, you literally threw away a piece of your life. You literally trashed yourself. The difference between labor and work exists in another way, and it was actually the differentiations talked about by the ancient Greeks. What the Greeks did was, the Athenians especially, I'm sure this blended over into other Greek city-states, but I'm really just talking about the Athenians. What the Athenians did was they made this huge leap. They realized that they wanted to have a gender divide in their society, where men would work and women would labor. Now, effectively, men would work at the front end, because what men are going to do is they're going to produce enough money that they can then go buy food, and then they're going to bring it home, and then the women are going to prepare the food, cook, they're going to raise the children. They, in other words, created the Victorian housewife society. Women in Athenian society had no public role. They could not own land, they could not divorce, they had no rights. They had no right to leave the house without their husband's permission or their dad or their brother's permission. The Taliban today give women more rights than Athenian society did, the society that we look up to. In this society, women were supposed to labor. They were supposed to take care of survival, right? Think about the way we have the house set up today, where we still expect women to do way more than their share of the laboring. And we expect women to have a full-time job at home, at work, and then come home and still cook and clean and help do more than their fair share of the child rearing. We still have that expectation in our society, even though we've supposedly moved on a little bit. Well, what happens is you don't notice labor unless it's absent, right? If the house is messy, you go, oh, the house is messy. But if the house is clean, you walk in and you throw your jacket and you pull up your socks and you throw them too. Do you see what I mean? You only notice labor when it's missing. Work is something you only notice when it happens. Like whatever architect made that building can point to that building and go, I did that. And every time he passes by with his friends and his family, he can point and go, I designed that. He didn't actually do it, he designed it. There's a huge difference between architecture and building. What we've done in our society is we created this industrial society where men and women in the beginning both labored and both worked. Because in that 12 to 14 hour workday, it was men and women in those factories. The women tended to do textiles, the men tended to do steel, and then there was some mixture in between the two genders. But at the end of the day, women were working. It wasn't except for the middle class that you could have to have something like, and really the upper middle class, not even the middle class. It wasn't until you had something like an upper middle class that you could have a situation where women could stay home and become full-time laborers and not actually go to work and work. In an industrial society, when you're on the assembly line, it's work, but I just got through telling you it's 99% labor, right? It's work in the sense that there's a product at the end. So for example, if you work in a shoe factory, there's going to be a shoe at the end. But you yourself are not a shoemaker. You're the person who does you're attaching the heel, or you're punching the hole for the laces. You're making a product that you probably can't afford. You're making a product that you will never own. It's going to be sold to some middle class, somebody somewhere, right? And you're working on this product on this assembly line. You can't really take pride in it because you didn't really make any of these shoes. You simply labored at some point on some of the shoes somewhere along the line. Like you can't point to anybody's shoes and go, oh my, I did that, because you don't know who did that. And even if that was a shoe from your factory that you knew for a fact you worked on it with 80 other people. So that your role in this is very, very minuscule. In effect, what industrialization did was it turned workers into full-time laborers as opposed to doing a little bit of labor and a little bit of work. Like the peasant did both. The peasant produced enough food to feed himself and his family, and then he paid his feudal lord, and there was always a little bit left over, and that was his work. Whereas in an industrial system, that doesn't exist. But it gets even worse, because what we've done is we've de-industrialized. We've taken the industry and we've exported it. We did this starting with the Reagan administration on a grand scale. The Reagan administration actually asked industry in the United States to come and de-industrialize and move overseas. The reason was twofold. Now, instead of having the laborer in the United States who can't afford the product, you're going to let the third world be that. So what effectively happened is the United States turned itself into a giant middle-class society. You walk up to anybody in the United States, lower class, upper class, middle class, and you go, what are you? And everybody says they're middle class, because even the poor can afford a widescreen TV, right? At the end of the day, everybody has access, if they want it, to credit, or they can make enough money if they're diligent, they can save and they can buy these goods. But now the third world is that population of people who work in a factory who can't afford the goods. What we've done is we've transferred the labor over. But the crazy thing is what job are you going to get? You're going to get a job working at a restaurant, waiting tables, or you're going to get a job IT, doing something IT oriented. You're going to get a job working for the government. You're going to get a job as a teacher. These are all services. We don't produce anything anymore. So we've, in the process, turned the whole United States into a society of laborers, not workers, who simply do things that you only ever notice in their absence. We've become a society, right? You really notice a waitress or a waiter when that person doesn't give you good service. You don't really notice them when they're giving you good service, right? We've become a society where everybody is a laborer. The laborers are in the factories in the third world, and then we service. We've become like a giant boutique. We might as well just be if there was a state more wealthy than us, there are a handful of states more wealthy than us per capita. They could come here and they could treat us like we were their beauty salon, which some of those states do. So we've created this system that produces stuff that we don't need for more than it's worth. We pay the workers for it less than they're worth. We get you through brainwashing techniques. We get you to buy this thing you don't need using your labor and your work and your credit. Because in the process, we've now also made it so that there's this massive amount of credit available that's actually very easy to access. And then once we've got you into the credit loop, we hit you with pretty high interest rates, especially now, because now we're using the crisis as an excuse, the economic crisis, the new depression that we're in. We're in a depression. I know it's depressing to say we're in a depression, but we're in a depression. And denying that you're depressed doesn't make the depression go away. This new crisis that we're in is used as an excuse to drive up the interest rates. So basically what they've done is they've trapped a whole section of the population into this debt crisis. If you don't make your credit card payments, if you don't make your house payments, your mortgage payments, if you didn't, right? People were buying houses that were worth $150,000 using the capitalist system for $600,000 before we went into this depression, because there was so much credit available and because there was so much speculation on the market, because the housing crisis, the housing bubble literally became a giant Ponzi scheme. I'm going to build a new house. The only way I'm going to make money is if somebody buys it. The reason people were buying the new houses wasn't because they could afford it, but because there was credit available and people were thinking it's a great investment because people are buying so many houses, the price is going up. So as long as people keep buying houses, the price keeps going up. As soon as the population of people who could buy houses dried up, there was only one way for it to go, 1929. This is the same thing, we've done this before. The solution at the end of the Great Depression was to have a highly regulated economy. This highly regulated economy worked very well. By 1973, our working standards were such that we had a 40-hour work week. People had vacation time. People had sick leave. There was industry in the United States. We weren't very competitive anymore by 1973. Our competitive edge was slipping because we were starting to develop a reputation for planned obsolescence. American industry didn't suck because we were a bunch of morons. American industry sucked because it was intentionally designed to suck, so that people would be forced to come back and buy a new product down the road. The Japanese hadn't yet started doing that, and as a result, the Japanese had a reputation for making cheap products that lasted forever, whereas we had a reputation for making expensive products that were crap because they fell apart on purpose. This wasn't an accident. The system by 1973, however, produced enormous amounts of wealth. The average American was doing very well. The distance between the top and the bottom was actually quite small. As an example, the top 1% in 1973 got 8% of the annual income. So I'll say it again. The top 1% in 1973 got 8% of the annual income that was produced in the United States. Today, the top 1% earns 40% of the annual income produced in the United States. In other words, the distance between the bottom and the top since 1973 has been growing geometrically. We were becoming more and more of an egalitarian society by 1973. There was lots of reasons for that. The number one primary reason was the unions. The union movement in the 19th century, in the 1800s, created a society through strikes, through work slowdowns, through sabotage, through whatever means were necessary, that eventually forced the capitalists to start making compromises. Might makes right. Sorry, it's just the way the world is. And the unions showed the capitalists over a period of 100 years of union activity that they were powerful enough that the capitalists had to meet them halfway, partway, not even halfway, partway. And they eventually lowered our hours, gave us things like overtime, right? And they caved in and gave us things like Social Security and unemployment benefits, etc., which, by the way, you pay for. So it's not like it's a giveaway. You're paying for it. So it's a product that you're getting through your own labor, your labor. Anyway, so we've got this system set up on that end. And then we got it kind of advanced a little bit. As a result of World War I, the United States made a terrible, disastrous mistake in World War I. It had colorblind draft boards. What happened was, when World War I happened and we instituted the draft, our goal was to just basically create an army of whites. And the reason you want to create an army of whites is the same reason the feudal lord wants an army of mercenaries. If you put African Americans into combat roles, two things are going to happen. One, they're going to come back feeling like they earned their citizenship, right? Which means they're going to feel entitled. And the other thing is they're going to feel a sense of self-confidence, especially if we win World War I. And that's exactly what happened. The civil rights movement didn't start in the 1950s and 60s. It actually started in the 1920s. And by the 1950s, it's rolling along at such a powerful click, at such a powerful pace, that it's starting to gain really serious attention. That movement then gets joined by a third element. So we got the unions, now we've got the African-American based civil rights movement, which evolves. It starts including migrant workers, Mexican Americans, Native Americans. It eventually goes to women, right? And by the 1970s, it'll even turn into a gay rights movement, right? We're going to be in a more inclusive society. That gets jumped on board by students. The students were sort of the last piece that made this really, really come home. Because the students had lots of energy, they were idealistic, and they were fearless. And they added to this fuel that the unions, who were also fearless, but right, they were being literally beaten up until the 1930s, that the unions and ultimately the religious left, the civil rights movement was fueled by what used to be the religious left in the United States. The students jump on board and they take it to the new level, and we call that the 1960s. The 1960s was the perfect storm, where you had the labor unions, the civil rights activists who were largely religious left, and the student movement jumping on together, and they transformed the United States. Now, a lot of that failed, a lot of that backfired because people got co-opted, the movement was derailed at some level, but it was also remarkably successful. It changed the way we elect the president, for example. It changed the way we think about race. It transformed our society on very significant levels. By 1973, the capitalist class was done with that. They did not want to see another 1960s. They were horrified by the changes that were made in the 1960s, and horrified by the changes that were being promised. Martin Luther King started off his career as a civil rights activist working on the African American problem in the South and how to liberate African Americans in the South. By the end of his career, he wasn't working on that anymore. He was a labor activist. By the end of his career, he was working on how to get everybody, regardless of their color, who was at the bottom, the poor class, up. He had transformed himself. He wasn't talking about fixing one race's problems. He was talking about fixing an entire population. The bottom, at least the bottom 84%, if not the bottom 99, right? That's very dangerous, because if you're just working on 15% of the population, the approximate population of African Americans, that's mildly dangerous. If you're working on 84% of the population, that's extraordinarily dangerous. That's a game changer. Guys like Bobby Kennedy was part of the system. He wasn't a crazy left-wing revolutionary. At best, he was a liberal, right? Which is a right-wing ideology. Sorry for those of you who think you're liberals. You're right-wingers. If you're a liberal, you're a right-winger. There is no middle in the United States. We have two rights. The middle is the socialists, the left are the communists. We have two rights. Bobby Kennedy at best was a liberal, right? However, he was a game changer liberal. He was doing really weird things. Like he was meeting with, of all people, migrant farm workers. Migrant farm workers don't vote. What's a politician meeting with people who don't vote for him? He was going to poor neighborhoods where people didn't vote. And he was meeting with people who were probably not going to vote for him, because he wasn't just about getting elected. He was part of this transformative movement We were in the midst, especially in 1968, of a global revolution. That revolution jumped oceans. It was taking place in Europe. It was taking place in Africa. It was taking place even in a Soviet bloc state. It was taking place in Czechoslovakia. By 1968, we were seeing revolutions all over the world, to the point where the student revolution in France was so intense, it took out the Fourth French Republic. The First French Republic was taken out by the combined Prussian, Russian, and English armies. The Second French Republic was taken out by the Prussian army. The Third French Republic was taken out by the Nazis. The Fourth French Republic was taken out by French students. We're in the Fifth French Republic today. That's how powerful 1968 got. And it was why it became unbelievably necessary to shoot Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. Because the country was going the wrong way as far as the capitalist class was concerned. They had to I don't actually know if there was a conspiracy for JFK. I don't care. I do believe that Bobby Kennedy and MLK and for that matter Malcolm X were taken out by the United States government. And the reason is they were dangerous. They were in the midst of a revolution, a global revolution, not just the United States revolution, that was talking about completely transforming our society, even the distribution of the wealth. By 1973, they came up with a plan. And the plan was actually several-fold, which is how we got to where we are now. One was you needed to neutralize the religious left. And the way they neutralized the religious left is they talked the religious left into thinking this. The reason why there was a religious left in the United States, evangelical Christians were leftists. The reason is because they had interpreted the Bible, where Jesus runs around healing people and making food for people and making wine and saying the meek will inherit the earth and the rich have as much chance of getting into heaven as a camel passing through the eye of a needle. It's not the other way around, the needle passing through the camel's eye. Anyway, right, which I think a lot of Protestants think today. I'm not really sure. They interpreted Jesus, he's in the temple smashing the moneylenders up. Like, he hates bankers and rich people, and he likes the meek. He must be a socialist. And so he looked like a hippie too. It was really crazy. And so at the end of the day, the deeply religious people in the United States had decided that it was their duty to get rid of the lower class status and pull everybody up, that everybody needed food, everybody needed good working conditions. MLK was part of this. This is part of this religious left movement. This is the legacy. And the religious left was there in the 1890s when the United States almost went socialist. And the religious left was there in the 1930s when the United States almost went socialist. The religious left was there in the 1950s and the 1960s. But the religious left got alienated in the 1960s. The students kind of went too far for the comfort zone of the religious left. Because on the one hand, the religious left wants everybody taken care of, but on the other hand, the religious left wasn't comfortable with all the love and the sex and the drugs. It was freaking them out. And the conservatives realized that was the first Achilles heel. If they could get in there and talk about sin and get the religious left to stop talking about social justice and start talking about sin, they could transform the religious left, and they pulled it off. They started talking about, your pot smoking, free sex having, tie-dye wearing son is going to hell, and it freaked out the religious left. And they transformed slowly through deals, probably starting in a serious way in 1964, but by 1972 they had moved this religious left into the religious right. They had transformed them. They had made an unholy alliance where the religious left was going to stop worrying about your material well-being and start worrying about your soul, and trying to regulate and create sin laws. Then the conservatives, because I shouldn't really blame the conservatives, then the capitalists, because it includes a bunch of liberals. By the way, you can't blame the Democrats or the Republicans, because the Democratic Party had a liberal Yankee population and a conservative Southern population. The Democratic Party was the two polar ends of the American political spectrum, and then the Republicans were the moderate party in the middle of the crazy Democratic Party that looked like it had multiple personality complex. And 1 minute is saying, we need to put black people in their place, and the next minute saying, we need to do something about the black people being put in their place. That was the Democratic Party. It's like, anyway. The next thing that the capitalist class did was they went after students. They figured they were an easy target, and they figured they were an easy target for two reasons. One, the student population is constantly turning over, right? It's not the same population. And the way you could go after students was charge tuition. In 1973, UT's tuition was about $70. In today's dollars, that's like maybe $250, $300. Wow, that's like 3 semester hours at ACC, right? And that's the cheap school. What the capitalist class did was they eliminated the student population by creating tuition and by putting it on such a high level that you had to get at least one part-time job, if not 2. They neutralized the students. Their goal was to create a society that wouldn't transform anymore, that would allow the redistribution of wealth from the middle class back to the upper class, and there would never be a 1960s movement again. This is it. They're not doing this again. The third thing they needed to do was they needed to break the unions. And that's where Ronald Reagan came in. Ronald Reagan, his election was effectively a repudiation of the regulation and the policies created in the 1930s. The reason FDR created the New Deal had nothing to do with the fact that liberals are socialists. What liberals are is they're people who are desperate to protect capitalism. They're willing to do anything to protect capitalism, including introducing a little bit of socialism. What a liberal is willing to do is inoculate, vaccinate capitalism against socialism by introducing a little bit. It's such a great analogy. And that's what the victory of FDR was. He was elected because the capitalist class wanted him to go in there and give us Social Security. Ultimately, by the time you get Great Society, all the other things that we associate with that, right? So LBJ is phase 2. With unemployment benefits and Head Start programs and the FDIC and Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. All of that was designed to prevent you from ultimately becoming creating a socialist state. So the liberals are working with the conservatives on this. At the end of the day, Reagan had this whole cadre of people called Reagan Democrats who were voting for him. And what he did was, beginning in 1983, the Commerce Department began bringing major corporations to DC and putting them up in hotels and having conferences. And in the conferences, they told these corporations, move your factories overseas. Get out of the US. Get out now. Run as fast as you can. Think of all the money you'll save. You won't have to pay the expensive American labor. You're going to have to incur other costs, though. For example, the shipping cost, which isn't going to be cheap. For example, having to communicate, right, in the pre-internet universe with your factory overseas and manage your factory overseas, which is going to mean lots of flying. There are lots of costs that come associated with this. Another cost is that you're going to lose because all of a sudden the jobs in the United States are going to start to suck, right? The union jobs were the best jobs. And so all of a sudden that's going to go away. And they're going to be replaced by a bunch of part-time jobs, which means people are going to be being paid less, which means people are going to have less capital available to buy the stupid products that you didn't need to begin with, right? So this is a terrible feedback loop that's going to actually cost the capitalists at the top very seriously. They knew this was going to be painful. They knew it was probably going to cost them way more money than they were going to save in labor costs. That it was actually probably long-term cheaper to leave the unions intact and keep the factories here than it would be if you moved the factories overseas. The reason they did it was the Reagan administration told them, don't worry about damaging the economy. After we break the unions, you can start bringing the factories back. Our goal is to break the unions. And they did, right? Our unions in the United States are not gone, but they're very weak. It's going to take a lot of work to revitalize and rejuvenate the unions. But how? If there are no jobs that you can unionize easily around. I mean, the problem is that we're missing this work base that's necessary to create the unions. The other thing is, they compensated for the loss of wealth by extending the credit. By making more credit available, it meant that you could keep consuming even though you didn't have the money because you had this suck job. You had two part-time jobs. The average American works 50 hours a week. In 1973, the average American worked 40 hours a week. The crazy thing about 1973 is there were legitimate, serious academics in economics who were talking about the 0-hour work week. there was this phenomenon called the 0-hour work week. There were articles being produced about it, that we were shrinking the work week so much that we were eventually going to kind of approach zero. We would never actually get to zero, but you go in and you do your hour and you're done with your week. We were going to approach zero. We've gone the opposite direction. We're now at 50 hours. That's an average of 10 hours a day, assuming you're working 5 days a week, right? That's the average. There's a whole population that's working way more than that. Just to give you I want to throw out these stats, and then I want to turn it over to Q&A because I don't want to leave you guys out of this, because otherwise then it becomes this authoritarian, me being your dictator kind of thing, and I hate that. Here's some fun stats to kind of play around with in your brain. The top 1%, the upper class, owns about 38% of the United States and makes right around 40% of the income. Now, the fact that they're making a little bit more than what they own, it seems like it's in line. It's not. The upper class doesn't spend its money. So the upper class is generating huge amounts of capital that it doesn't spend. What that's doing is that's pulling all the capital to the top, where it actually chokes off the economy. They're literally cutting their own throats. It's why Warren Buffett is running around screaming, "Tax me." The reason is he knows that if you don't pass laws to tax the upper class will never give up their money, including him. But if they don't start giving up their money and start paying for infrastructure development, putting the money back into the markets, there'll be no customers. This is an unsustainable system. But it's way worse than that, of course, because we're running out of resources, and we're running out of resources on an epic level. So maybe that's the least of our worries, is that we're running out of capital at the bottom as well. The next 15%, which are usually referred to as the upper middle class, they own about 41% of the United States. The middle class, which is the middle 33%, the middle third of the United States, owns about 18% of the United States. The sometimes referred to as lower middle class, that population is about 36% of the United States. So it's the single largest class in the United States. They own less than 2% of the United States. And then the lower class, the bottom 17%, own less than 0.1% of the United States. If you put the bottom two classes together and call them the working class, which is a much nicer title, right, than lower class, because they're scum. The bottom 53%, the 36% from the lower middle class and then the 17% from the lower class, own less than 2% of the entire wealth in the United States. The bottom 53% own less than 2% of the entire United States of America. If you put this on a chart that's on a 8.5 by 11 page, you will see the first three classes, but that bottom class will be the thickness of your ink. So the bottom two classes will be, so you won't see them. They won't show up on your little chart because they own so little of the wealth. Anyway, I want to stop there, even though I have so much more to say. By the way, the system sucks. There, I want to say.
How come CEOs and various executives?
Here are these CEOs, and I'm interpreting your question a little bit. They have responsibility to their corporation. They have responsibility to their society, and they're not being held accountable for bankrupting corporations, which eliminates jobs, wrecks whole sections of the economy, for example. They're not responsible for the types of decisions they're making. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. The system is designed to protect the people who work in corporations. The corporation itself could conceivably be punished, but the individuals working within the corporations aren't. Now, one of the reasons for that isn't because we don't have laws on the books. We actually do have laws on the books that do hold these people accountable. Those laws were created in particular, especially after the Great Depression, in part so that you could kind of hold them and create this regulated economy. What happened was the Reagan administration came in and said, we really don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to regulate the economy. How can we start ignoring the government's role in the economy? And they began just appointing people who were supposed to be in charge of these things, who were against doing their job. They were ideologically against doing their job, and they just literally started slacking off. By Bush, for example, this got so bad that effectively derivatives became fully legal. Up until Reagan, derivatives is pure Las Vegas. So let's say you think that the price of oil is going to be $100 in the future, a barrel, right? And whatever it is now, let's say it's $80 now, but you think it's going to be $100 in the barrel. If you're buying on the futures market, you buy the barrel of oil in the future. You're actually buying it. Now, it's true it hasn't been produced yet, but odds are it will be. Otherwise, we're gonna be in so much hurt, we're not gonna care that we lost a little bit of money. When you do derivatives, you don't buy anything. You just bet. You just say, I think it's going to be $100, and then people pull their money and they tell you what they think it's going to be, and that's how these get distributed. It's just pure Las Vegas. It's just betting. Credit default swaps, what you do is you figure out, okay, that guy will never make his payments, so I'm betting that he'll never make his payments, which of course then drives his interest rates up, which make it less likely that he'll make his payments, which cause more people to start doing credit default swaps, which drive that guy's interest rates. It's one of the reasons why Greece's economy is in the ruin it is because every time somebody did a credit default swap on Greece's economy, every time they shorted the economy, another thing you can do, every time they shorted the economy, it drove the interest rates up, and it literally what became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as an investor who's doing this, I want Greece to default because I'm going to make killer cash when they do. This is in my best interest. So we created a system that allows people to benefit from your suffering. What's really even strange about it is that you could do this with anything, right? You walk into a doctor's office, you've got a lump. The doctor goes, it's nothing, take some acetaminophen. You come back 6 months later, a year later, turns out it's a cancerous tumor. The doctor's gonna make a lot more money now, right? The lump was easy to take out when it was just a little itty bitty bump on your skin. Now that this could be metastasizing cancer, it's in his best interest to let you wait. I mean, people say, don't take money out of the incentives for medicine. Hello, take money out of, don't have that as an incentive. Our whole society is kind of designed this way. The Bush administration, the junior administration, and the Obama administration have intentionally not been prosecuting, even though the laws are on the books, you could, have intentionally not been prosecuting people for wrongdoing since the economic decline that started in December of 2007. Right, the depression started in December of 2007 by the government's own admission. Now, they have not been prosecuting those guys. What they do instead is they do the investigation. Our government's investigating criminal activity in corporate level. They do the investigation, they take all the evidence, and they hand it over to the corporations, and they go, here, look, we think we may have found wrongdoing. And then what's the corporation going to do? They're going to cover it up, hide it. I mean, the government is completely complicit with these guys. But you shouldn't be surprised. What is a profit? A profit is generated by me convincing people to buy something they don't need for more than it's worth while paying my labor less than their worth. I mean, entrepreneurs are not the good guys. They're the evil guys in our society because their whole objective is to generate profit at the expense of wasting resources, which are lives, right? Because at the end of the day, every time you lose money, you lost time times energy. You're literally losing a piece of your life. Is it feasible to create alternative economies? And he mentioned that there are actually labor unions in the north that are creating, they're going to try and create green industry. We actually have some stuff going on in Austin that's oriented that way. If you can if you could get enough of the population to sort of break out of the economy and create their own economy, a green economy, a labor economy that isn't, designed to exploit people, that would be amazing, and it would be, in ultimate sense, it would be a revolution. It would be a form of sabotage because you effectively wouldn't be a participant in this negative economy anymore. The problem is how do you get the resources to do that? I mean, at the end of the day, the way our society is set up is it's so capital driven that unless you have a little bit of capital, it would be hard to kind of pull that off on a grand scale. I mean, we've been trying to do this for at least 200 years, right? I mean, the Oneida, they actually created basically a giant cooperative that made silverware. It's famous high-quality silverware. I mean, these guys were a bunch of basically communists living on a commune, making silverware and selling it. Ultimately, they got co-opted by the system, and they've turned into this corporation. I mean, that's what the system does. Is it co-ops and it penalizes. I mean, I think that we should do those alternative things wherever we can. But and they are revolutionary and they do fight the system. But the history of it tells me that, because we've been doing it for so long, that at the end of the day, we need a much more epic change. We need to do something much more grand scale. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think this Occupy movement is so exciting, because it's globally hooked up. I mean, this isn't just Austin. This isn't just Wall Street and Oakland. This is global. I mean, this is happening in the Arab world. This is happening in Europe. Spain has been doing this since June. So his question is, what's the end game if they've messed up their own economy? One of the things that these corporations have done is they become multinational corporations. So they don't actually care about the United States anymore. All they care about is their corporation, which is transnational. And there is a new United States of America. That new United States of America is the People's Republic of China, which is neither people's or republic. Right? It's basically a giant crony capitalist society that the cronyism is done from the Communist Party, which is the most hysterical thing the world has got I've ever seen. And the PRC is going to probably eclipse the United States before this century is out, right? The hysterical thing about the Project for the New American Century is that the effect it had was that it accelerated the decline of the American Empire. Having said that, the American Empire is still intact. We have 700 military bases outside of the United States of America right now. We are an empire. We have a military presence in 2/3 of the 193 independent states on the planet Earth. Officially, we probably have a military presence in another 6 unofficially. We are the world, if you include all those states in there, we are the world's largest ever empire. We've eclipsed the Brits. The Brits only occupied 40% of the world. We're in 2/3. Now we're even more clever than the Brits. The Brits came in and said, this is ours, and they planted their flag, and they tried to build railroads and develop it. We go in and we're like, we're gonna protect our corporations. Oh, you wanna charge too much for bananas? I'm sorry, we're gonna overthrow your government violently, right? I mean, that's what we've done. But then we immediately back off and we go, no, do whatever you want to. You wanna be a democracy? That's great. If you need some help, we're happy to bomb you into democracy later. And so what we've done is we're still holding on, right? And the history of empires, as a general rule, is to be really, really nasty as you're going down. And so we should expect more really ugly, violent events as we go down. The end game, I don't know. I have to think, because, but see, I don't think it's that simple. I have to think that these guys are just so short-term oriented, they just don't care. Like Warren Buffett knows every time he makes a profit and pulls more of the wealth to the top, he's screwing himself, which is why he's running around going, take half my wealth, take half. Please, I'm begging you to take out. And then we're like a bunch of morons. No, we're not going to raise taxes. It's a principle thing. And here's the guy who's making the money. The question is about a standard currency and whether the United States will allow a standard currency to form if it were to de-imperialize. In a way, the reason the United States doesn't want to have a new standard world currency, the euro is competition. The reason is because it's been the dollar. The U.S. was already did that. And the way we did it was we pegged. All right, so World War II is winding down. It's December of 1944. The Germans they basically just took their Eastern Army, the army fighting the Soviet Union. They stripped it of its best soldiers and its best equipment, and they left just a fraction of their army on the Eastern Front. Totally ballsy, crazy, insane move. They took all that equipment, they railroaded it, because they figured it was winter, the Russians would hold off for the winter. They railroaded it across Germany, across Europe, and they parked it on the Belgium-Germany frontier, and they attacked. And their goal was to go to the English Channel and cut the British Army off from the American Army. Once they had the British Army surrounded, they were going to crush it, take it out, and then what they thought would happen is the United States and Britain would be so horrified by the loss of so many troops that they would then sue for peace, and then the Germans would take their entire army and relocate it on the Eastern Front and fight the Soviets in one last epic Valhalla-bound hurrah. The Germans attacked. They were smashing us to pieces. They had the better soldiers, the better officers, the better tactics, the better equipment. They were cutting us up. It was a disaster. The American military was just withering in the December weather. The one exception is the 82nd Airborne at Bastogne. Other than that, right, the U.S. military just disintegrated. It was catastrophic. The Germans were on their way. 2.5 weeks of just pounding us, and they ran out of gasoline. And we decided in that moment, oh man, we never want to be that sucker. We never want to be that guy who's winning a battle and can't pull it off because they ran out of gasoline. Tanks don't drive real well without gasoline. Then the German Wehrmacht just stopped in the cold. The clouds cleared, and we came in with airplanes, and we just blew them to pieces. we decided we were never going to get stuck in that position. So that January, the very next month, so January 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to the Suez Canal in Egypt, and he met the King of Saudi Arabia on a ship. And he sat down with him and he said, I want to make a deal with you. You guarantee me a steady flow of oil forever, till you run out. And in return, we guarantee the Saudi royal family. If you have an internal democratic movement, we'll help you slaughter your people. If you get invaded by outsiders, we'll help you drive them off. We want an air base in Tehran, and we want a corporation named Aramco to be the supervisor for all your oil exports. You'll get half, we get half. It's a really good deal. And the King of Saudi Arabia went, it is. Thank you so much. And they made that deal. Now, we've had a kind of roller coaster ride with the Saudis, don't get me wrong, but our relationship is so close that when Junior's corporation Arbusto went bankrupt, it was Osama bin Laden's dad who bailed him out, right? I mean, our relationship was so close that when Prince Bandar was, people were thinking he was going to become eventually the heir apparent. He's since fallen out of favor. He was called Bush 5 because he spent so much time at the Bush household. He was like the fifth son, right? This relationship is totally interlocked. The reason why this is important is the United States, after they made the deal with the Saudis, told the world, right after we nuked Japan, we dropped the bombs on Japan, we told the world, by the way, whenever you make a transaction, oil transaction, we don't care who does what. South Korea is buying oil from Kuwait, we don't care. It could be, Guinea-Bissau buying oil from their next door neighbor, or from Nigeria, which isn't next door neighbor but close. We don't care. You are going to make the oil transaction deal in the dollar. And that's it. Oh, did you see the nukes go off? Wasn't that pretty? And we bullied the world into protection money, because every time anybody made an oil transaction, they had to convert their currency into dollars and then convert back into the local, and every time you make that transaction, we would take a little cut. So even if we weren't totally in on the oil transaction, we made a cut. And that's what the dollar did, because oil is the #1 most important commodity on the planet Earth. Period. Even before food, because that's how we grow our food. We have factories plowing the field, factories plant,
we have fertilizer made out of oil.
Everything is tractors, right? Everything is done by oil. When we run out of oil, by the way, we are going to be really, really hungry. You're going to so hate that. When James Madison got the Constitution in the form of 2 stone tablets from a burning bush. Oh, that's not the right story. Hold on. Let me see if I got this. When James Madison wrote the Constitution, which one guy did, by the way. James Madison wrote the Constitution, front to back, right? At the Constitutional Convention, people came in and made changes to it, but it was James Madison's Constitution. He said, openly, publicly, in letters to France, not publicly, in letters to France, he said, I am creating a system that will protect the top 1%, he called it the opulent minority, from the rest of the country. In one letter he said troublesome and meddlesome outsiders. He meant the 99%. Somehow we became the outsiders, right? Now he changed his mind later and he formed the Democratic Republicans and he went, oh, what did I do? And he fought his monster. The United States had slavery and tobacco as a major function. I think I just talked about the greed aspect since that was James Madison's design for the Constitution. The United States was actually, since you brought it up, kind of the ultimate locust swarm. We came to Virginia, we being English, I guess. The English came to Virginia and they began growing tobacco after the Jamestown colony almost failed. John Rawle figured out how to cure tobacco. Next thing you know, the British are marketing tobacco at home. The British launched the world's first ever large-scale ad campaign to get their own people hooked on tobacco so that they could create an artificial market. Right? This is capitalism 101. It's the ultimate market. But because tobacco is labor intensive, you want slave labor, so you bring in the slaves. But because it's also land intensive, tobacco destroys the soil. It wrecks the nutrition in the soil, which makes it harder to grow more crops of tobacco. What you want to do is you need to have more land. So Virginia had to keep going west. And that made it necessary to keep slaughtering the Native Americans, taking more land, burning it out, slaughter more Native Americans, and keep going west, bringing your slaves with you as you went. The United States' ultimate Drang nach Ost? No, that's not it. That was the Germans. I always get this so confused. The United States' ultimate manifest destiny, which is no different than Drang nach Ost, but it's going the other direction. Drang nach Ost is
One world republic.
the United States' whole goal behind Manifest Destiny was to create more land so that the South could do slave labor and burn out that soil to produce a product that killed its customers. I mean, that's our foundation. Now, eventually we threw in sugar and we threw in cotton in the mix, and I guess those are two relatively useful products. But, you know, the original product that was tobacco. I mean, that's the foundation for our society. Exploitation of labor, wholesale genocide, and ultimately the wrecking of the environment.
First, they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. Then you win.
I heard him say the revolution won't be televised. Al Jazeera proved him wrong. Twitter has him paralyzed.